Hello, so this is just a quick introduction on Module B, and in particular with reference to T.S. Eliot's poetry. So basically what I'll outline within this video is how you could potentially structure your essay. So I think one of the best ways to go about Eliot's poetry and to create a really flexible essay is to actually concentrate on the actual context, so modernism, and how this context influences responses and how the text is valued. So the first thing to actually think about is what was inherent to modernism and why was modernism so significant in terms of its context. So in terms of background, I guess modernism was a really turbulent time. So that was just after Romanticism, where there was this whole appreciation for nature, and life was perceived in a really romantic way. Whereas following World War I and also the rising industrialism, which permeated into the cityscape, we saw this push away from Romanticism and instead a sense of angst that permeated within the individual. And this really rose from the squalid conditions that were inherent to the cities. There was this perceived lack of meaning, where composers actually really started to question the meaning of life, and the existential thoughts came out, where they were questioning what was previously held as a common belief. So a really good example of that is religion, where after World War I and all of these people died, people actually started to question whether religion really was helpful, really was constructive to the individual, and there was almost this loss of a reliance on religion as providing a moral compass. So that's just like a really, really brief background, but basically what we can do is in paragraphs 1 and 2, you can actually explore the physical ramifications of the modernist world on the environment and therefore the individual. So this gives you a really good opportunity to discuss the inversion of Romanticism. So instead of talking about nature in this really romantic way, where it provides happiness for the individual, or where it's a source of hope, instead quite often what we see is that images of nature are inverted, and instead they're quite lifeless, and that represents the whole sentiment that the cityscape and the urban environment was then overtaking nature and creating this monotonous lifestyle. And that links to the whole context of the Industrial Revolution. So I think what you will notice when you actually start to go through Eliot's poems is that inversion of, that subversion of natural imagery, as well as a lot of dark imagery on the streets of the city. And I guess these gloomy images that Eliot creates really are a reflection of the individual's sense of disconnection towards their newly urban world. And also we'll see a lot of images of monotony, of repetition, to highlight the sense of boredom or the sense of disengagement from their world, where it's no longer like stimulating for the individual. And then in your second half of the essay, so you can actually go through the mental and the psychological impacts of modernism on the society and the individual. So when Eliot wrote this, we saw a really, really dramatic shift away from the passion and idealism of the Romantic age. And what we saw with the onset of modernism was this whole sense of isolation and this really bleak view towards human existence in the world. And that can be seen through themes such as alienation, disconnection, cynicism, this sense that life is futile, a constant questioning of really common structures, and also a common man or a common character. So that can really be seen in the flaneur, so the man who wanders the city streets and just narrates what he sees. So what you can actually do to sum up is in paragraph 1 and 2, pick 2 poems. I would say, yes, they should complement each other, but you also want to be able to draw out differences. So 2 poems, so one on the physical ramifications of modernism for each, and then in your second half, those 2 same poems again, where you explore the mental, psychological impacts of modernism on the society and the individual. In terms of that, I would also highly recommend having spare paragraphs on the other poems, because you've got to remember that in the HSC and in your trials or any like internal or external exam, they can specify a certain poem. So you can be asked to talk about a specific poem, and you will need content on that, so that you can either sub that in place of one of your other paragraphs, or weave that in with your other paragraphs, and shorten your other paragraphs and weave that in also. And that's how you structure your essay.